I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside, it's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, "No, no, 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 we're going to do this." And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off road ability, as well as its robust interior, are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show. Today on the James Altucher Show.
This is part 2 of my discussion with Robert Greene, author of The Daily Laws, but also one of my favorite writers, as I mentioned before. He's the author of The 48 Laws of Power, another book called Mastery, another book called The Laws of Human Nature, books on war, books on seduction. He really has just a very deep insight into human nature, and he has so many stories to tell about it. And in The Daily Laws, he's more autobiographical than ever before. So we talk a little bit more about his personal story and some of the ideas from the Daily Laws. Part 2 is available today as well as part 1. So this is part 2. I'll ask you about my personal experience. I've gone from, let's say, and this is just a short list, but from being a computer programmer to a writer to an entrepreneur to hedge fund manager, comedian,
Wow.
on and on. And I do get that excitement that you're talking about. I do engage in that path towards mastery, but sometimes I feel like maybe I'm a dilettante, jack of all trades, master of none. Even though I do follow my heart on what's exciting me, I that's my rule.
Well, you're very successful and you're very powerful in your own realm. So, I mean, I don't think it's nothing that's not working there. I think it's more important that you're able to explore and try new things. But the interesting thing that would happen possibly with you, or maybe it already has happened, is that you take some of these, because I can relate to this, having had 60 different jobs that are even more disparate than what you just described. I mean, I did construction work, I worked in a detective agency, I was a hotel receptionist. I mean, I could go on and on and on. But the thing that could be interesting is combining some of these things. I mean, you can't really combine comedy with chess, I don't think. But if you could combine some of the other things that you've learned in some kind of new entrepreneurial realm, that would be very exciting. Yet there's a lot of people, particularly younger people, who have a problem now because there is so much information available where they try something for a year or two, and they move on to something else in another couple of years, and they move on to something else, and they never really master anything. And then they're like 31, 32, and they've learned all of these different things, but nothing connects, right? And so it's not that I want you to explore, I want you to try new things, but there has to be kind of a frame of reference, right? It can't be, you're trying out being a chef and then you're trying out being a rocket scientist, you know? I mean, there has to be some kind of thing that in a vague way connects things. So for me, it was writing. I tried journalism, I tried novels, I tried theater, I tried film. Nothing quite worked. And then I tried books. But it wasn't, I know I worked in a detective agency. It sounds like a contradiction. But when you're a writer, you want all those kind of stupid, boring jobs because you're learning about people and you're accumulating stories. But you want to have something that there's some kind of connection, right, between the things that you're doing that gives it a something where later on you can find common points that you can bring together, where you can create some kind of new business that no one has ever thought of before. And I have a lot of examples in Mastery of people who did that and then suddenly a connection where they wake up one day and go, this is something that I'm going to start that no one ever thought about. I talk in Mastery about Paul Graham, who he was a hacker. He went to MIT. He studied artificial intelligence. And he ended up kind of getting very bored and frustrated with it. And then he decided to become an artist. And he went to art school and went in Italy and he was living in Italy. And then he came back to New York and he was living in a loft painting and not making very much money, but he was kind of loving it. And he heard an ad on the radio that was touting that the internet, this was 1994 or 5, that was saying the internet is going to be where we're going to buy things in the future. No one had ever thought of that before, right? There was no place to buy anything on the internet. And he's sitting there painting in his loft and he goes, with all of my skills with design now, with painting, and all I learned in Italy, and all of my skills with artificial intelligence and computers, I'm going to design the most aesthetically pleasing and great store online where you could buy things. With the first one. And he created it. Yahoo bought it for like $5 million. And that was the start of his incredible career. He went on to start, $1 billion businesses like Y Combinator. But he made that connection between these two things that you normally wouldn't connect. And then it kind of came this sort of perfect storm there.
And I think the key is connecting, having the ability to connect ideas, because you mentioned like it's hard to go from being a chef to a rock star. But even there, I think maybe it's hard, or maybe the key is coming up, having the insight and coming up with the connection between the two. I have no idea what it might be, but it's just like if you look at the hierarchy of species, humans are part of the hominids, as part of the whatever, the apes, and on back to mammals and so on. Everything ultimately falls under any two parts of this tree fall under some umbrella, no matter how broad. You mentioned it's hard to connect comedy and chess, but I'm thinking about it in a meta way. Like you mentioned when Arthur Kessler said that comedy is about taking two very disparate things and somehow connecting them in a humorous way. So an example might be Andrew Schultz, who was once a guest on this podcast. He has a joke. I won't tell the joke, but I'll tell the idea, which is that he compares good international cooking to wherever women are mistreated the worst. What countries women are, like, no one ever says, hey, let's go out for some Canadian tonight. They said, let's go out for Middle Eastern. So right. So you laugh because it's like even just a funny concept connecting these two things. And perhaps in chess, this kind of attack works in this one type of opening. Maybe it'll work in this other type of opening somehow. Like having the meta ability that you learn from mastering different things could potentially, I don't know, connect two areas somehow. I don't know, because you talk a lot about the connection between two ideas, and I think, or multiple careers and skills, and I think that's very important.
Well, that's how the brain works. I meditate every morning. And when you start meditating, you try and shut the mind up and all the thoughts going on. Suddenly, all kinds of weird associations start happening between things. That's the natural flow of the brain. It's always connecting things together. And I don't know if this is relevant or not, but I remember the story in the 1950s. This friend of a writer once challenged him, saying, you always choose stories for your novels that you kind of know, but it'd be impossible for you to write something about anything And the writer said, no, I could write a good novel about anything. It was like a challenge. The other guy says, okay, all right, I'm going to challenge you. Write a great novel that has to do with drapes. That's about the changing new drapes being put up. He goes, all right, I'm going to do it. And he wrote a book about how in an insane asylum they had to suddenly change the drapes and how it drove everybody crazy and it created all of this drama and turmoil. And it became such a successful novel that they made a movie out of it called The Cobweb, which you can go look and see now in the 1950s with Lauren Bacall, all these famous
Huh.
actors. Very interesting movie. Um, so, that's how the brain works. You can connect anything, right? That challenge. You can take two very disparate ideas and find some point of putting them together and making a great novel, a joke, a new business, or whatever. That's true creativity to me.
Yeah, I agree, and and again, I always wonder for myself, like I really do like how you're creative, but you keep it under the umbrella of writing, and you know, I might be an entrepreneur for a few years and then write a book about entrepreneurship, and so they're two disparate,
Which you
but
did.
yeah, and but then again, I wonder, oh, would I have gone further as an entrepreneur if I didn't write a bunch of books, or would I have gone further as a writer if I didn't do years of comedy or whatever? And so sometimes I have regret, but I always stick to the rule. Okay, I have to do what I love doing, and unfortunately for me, it changes a lot.
Yeah, but when you do the different things, you go all in, right? You actually,
Yeah.
I'm not as opposed to people who just learn little things and then give up. You wrote a book, you actually produced a book, you started a business, you have a podcast, you are a successful comedian, you are a master chess player. There are plenty of examples I used in Mastery of people like you, more famous, I'm afraid to say, but like Benjamin
It's
Franklin,
definitely true.
although we don't know what you'll be like in 100 years from now, people will be talking about you. But like Benjamin Franklin, he was a great writer. He wrote journalist pamphlets. He was a political figure. He was a scientist. He was a great seducer. I don't know if you want to say that that's part of a skill, but he was, had all these different things. And he was like you. He get bored and he wanted to explore new things. And he wrote books and he tried experiments, etc. And he traveled. He had a great life, and he was a master of many different things. So that's an equal a path I think is very valid and it's what you have managed to carve out, and it's what makes you different, what makes you unique. It's what makes you James, as opposed to if you had stayed as a computer programmer your whole life. I mean, look, where would you be right now? You wouldn't be a very happy person.
Probably not. No, and thank you for saying that. But it's interesting. You talked about Benjamin Franklin as seduction, as a seducer, but persuasion, which you've written a lot about, and seduction and so on. This is also an important skill of not only mastering a particular domain, but mastering life. Where do you think people mess up the most on persuasion? In the book, you also describe how one should stay above the fray. So the fray I think of as like the massive arguing that happens 24 hours a day now on social media over issues that will be forgotten in weeks or months or whenever. And what are the skills of persuasion that you personally have found most successful?
Well, the thing you want to avoid is arguing or telling people directly what you want them to do. That is violating the most important law of human psychology. People have their own ideas. We're naturally resistant and defensive. We think that what we believe about politics, about ourselves, about the arts, we think it's the most brilliant thing around, right? We have that, what I call a self opinion, right? It's very natural, it's ingrained. And if you suddenly try and tell somebody, well, you're wrong, you're not really, you do have the wrong opinion about politics, you're on the wrong side of things, they're not going to suddenly go, oh, yeah, you're right. I'm going to think about that. You're right. They're going to get angry and defensive and bitter, and you're going to create the opposite effect that you wanted, right? Unintended consequences. You're going to make them more defensive and more entrenched and more bitter. So you don't preach at people, you don't yell at people, you don't argue. Anytime you give into that, it's not because you have this sort of noble Gandhian idea that you were right and you're going to convince people. Really, what's going on is you're a selfish person who believes that are convinced of the truth and that other people are ignorant and you need to educate them. It stems from your own arrogance, your own ego. It doesn't stem from a good place. So learn that when you try to argue and berate people and tell them what to do, it is not because you are suddenly trying to help them. It's because you're giving into one of your most selfish and weakest impulses, right? So get over that and then make the next step, which is if you're really interested in changing people, because a lot of these people that shout on the internet or whatever, or complain about some political thing, they really don't want to change things. They just want to whine and vent, right? That's their main thing. Because if they really wanted to change, they would go through this process of how do I influence people? How do I persuade them? All right. So if your goal is actual influence, if you get over that selfish impulse to just yell and scream and berate people, well, I have to be more subtle. I have to think of where their mind is at. Why do they believe that Donald Trump is the greatest president? I'm not saying that those people are wrong. I'm just putting out a point here. Why do people believe that? Are there maybe some reasons that come from their conditions and circumstances? If I want to change their opinion, maybe I have to understand where their opinion comes from, the roots of it. And then I can make little bites at it kind of indirectly and make them the only thing that you want to do is with people, let's say it's your child who won't listen to you, right? And has become very rebellious, like a 16-year-old, etc. Telling him or her, this is what you need to do, stop that, is only going to make them worse. We've all had that experience. You want to go inside their mind and you want to sort of slowly push them in other directions and get them to think that maybe they don't have the right idea. But to do that, you have to be subtle and you have to think inside the other person, right? So that's the number one mistake people make. They're entrenched in their own ideas and they're not getting inside of their audience. They're not getting inside of the viewpoint of their customers. They're not getting inside of the viewpoint of the voters who were voting for them. They're not getting inside the viewpoint of the friends or children who have a different mindset. So just making that leap and saying, I'm going to shut up my own ideas that I have, and I'm going to actually try and understand their point of view, suddenly gives you the power to maybe alter it a little bit and maybe even alter your own ideas as well.
And so let's take the example of when, you were working on the book with 50 Cent and when you went from Simon Schuster to Harper and the editor at Harper said, Robert, this is what you need to do. What if you disagreed with that editor? And at what point do you know if you're being defensive or if you should listen?
As I said earlier, you can listen too much to other people and you could, make a terrible mistake that way. So, you know, if you it all depends on the person who's criticizing you. So if you put something out on YouTube and you read the comments below and someone's saying, Robert, you're full of shit, you're not going to give credence to that person because who's that idiot who's just sitting in his room typing that out and doesn't make any kind of constructive comments, right? I'm not going to pay any attention to that. But if an editor at Harper's who's been very successful, who's a very smart individual, and makes very salient points about the weakness of my book, then I'm going to listen to him. And I did listen to him because initially, what happens when we're criticized is we get defensive and we get upset. And that's completely natural. It's happened to me many times. It's not like you suddenly ever go, oh, you're right, I'm wrong. There's always that first defensiveness. But then you calm yourself down and you go through that process that we're talking about, the autopsy that you were mentioned, and you go, well, maybe they're right. Maybe I have to listen. Are they actually are they attacking me out of politics because they're envious? No, this guy isn't envious of me. He's just a publisher. He's not trying to be like me. He has no animus against me. So there must be some truth to it, and I'm going to listen to him. That's the key, is if the person criticizing you, it seems objective and there's nothing personal about it, then there's probably something you can trust. So you have to kind of look at the source of the criticism.
This leads to another question, which you write a lot about. Given the fact that there's so much duplicity and people wear, whether they intend to or not, they wear so many different masks in front of their social groups. I find I'm often a very poor judge of character. How do you think one gets better at that? Because again, you point out some great things about character, that they're not always, sometimes nice people are not so nice. Sometimes mean people are insecure and could be nice. But how do you kind of meet a person and figure out, hey, what's underneath these masks?
Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to have the realization that you don't take appearances for reality. So, imagine that you're a child, you're 4 or 5 years old, and you have some quality that really irritates people. You're too pushy, you're too aggressive, or you're too nice and pleasing or whatever. And your parents and your teachers, they criticize you. And you learn that's very painful. So you develop a strategy that now is the strategy of your entire life of disguising that irritating quality because it means you're criticized and it means, people aren't going to listen to you. So you spend your youth, your teen years and older kind of finding ways to disguise the fact that you're basically insecure or aggressive or insecure, etc. And so people never get to suspect that, right? But underneath, you still remain the same person. Okay. So people are presenting a front to you, a facade that is often not disguising the opposite. It can be disguising the opposite. And I tell people if somebody has a very strong quality that's so in your face, 9 times out of 10, they are disguising the opposite. But sometimes people are just sort of subtly disguising that irritating quality that they've learned to disguise. So get over this notion early on in your life so that you won't suffer that appearances are not reality. So that person in the office who's always smiling, who's always like saying how wonderful you are, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't mean this as a criticism, I'm just talking about reality, that there's probably something going on underneath. Now, they might just be a very pleasant person, and there are people like that, and there's nothing against them. But they also might be this person who is very passive aggressive, who's actually learned the front of being pleasant and sweet and charming and saying all the wonderful things about you in order to like get you to lower your defenses so they can enter your life and then inflict some kind of pain on you, right? And so you have to become a better judge of people and not trust the appearances and go through a process. Now, you pay attention. We're very good at we all have natural bullshit detectors that we just don't listen to that get kind of worn away over the years. And that bullshit detector is in nonverbal communication. So when people are talking to you and they're saying all these wonderful, sweet, wonderful things, but there's something a little bit dead in their eyes, it seems a little bit mechanical. You have the impression that they've said it to 100 other people in the same way. You have an intuition about it, but you're not listening to that intuition, right? So pay attention to these other things going on. Very good ways of judging people's character. But the most important thing of all is to always tell yourself the appearance that people present is A, it is the reality, but that's pretty rare. B, it's not really the reality. There's something else going on. Or C, it's the opposite. There's something very dangerous going on here. Because if you have a toxic narcissist, and I've worked for people like that, and we've all been involved with them, they don't come in with a little sign saying, I'm a toxic narcissist. They don't display it. They've learned to be very charming, very nice, very listen to you. Then you get involved with them and it comes out slowly. But I try and show in the laws of human nature and in the daily laws that there are always, always signs of those toxic people before you get involved in them. You're just not paying attention.
You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues to, or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get two memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply. There was one section I really loved, September 5th. Place yourself in she, SHIH. And it says basically there's this one line where you say, the essence of strategy is not to carry out a brilliant plan that proceeds in steps. It is to put yourself in situations where you have more options than the enemy does. That's definitely important in war, but it's like even important in career or income. Like, there's the whole almost stereotype or cliche of diversify your income, have 5 sources of income. And if your only strategy was to rise up at General Motors, you might get fired or laid off. and
Right.
you miss out on you took too much risk. Having options is the best way to succeed without risk than having clear goals in just one path. And I thought that was just important to underline.
Yeah, I mean that comes from the 33 Strategies of War, the book I wrote, and I went heavily into The Art of War by Sun Tzu, which is a very famous, very interesting book about strategy. And I was reading the Sun Tzu, and I was thinking this book is brilliant, but it's kind of abstract. And I bet in Chinese, it's not so abstract, right? Because there must be another layer. So I bought this version of The Art of War that was annotated, which explained each character in the book and what it really meant, and kind of explained it in kind of literal English. And obviously, I didn't read the whole book that way, but there was this one word, shi, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it, but it was this idea of placing the army in a position of power. And the metaphor that he used was when you have a bow and an arrow, and you've strung the bow and it's taut, and you're about to release the arrow, that is shit. That's a position of potential energy and power. Or if you have a boulder on top of a hill, a mountain, and it's teetering, etc., and it can fall, that is a position of incredible and potential energy and power. So shit really meant potential energy, right? It didn't say whether it could go here or there or where it would attack. It just meant it was in a position where all this momentum and energy would suddenly come behind it. And that was what the original Chinese word meant. I thought, this is really interesting. And I looked at some of the great generals and war, particularly Napoleon Bonaparte, and decided that that was his strategy. He wouldn't attack the enemy army straight on. He would find a position somewhere on the map where he would place 4 or 5 divisions of his army. They'd give him maximum options and potential to attack from many different directions, depending on what the enemy did. So he was using that metaphor of the taut bow and the boulder on the hill. He was putting himself in a position of tremendous energy and momentum. And I thought, as you point out, that this is analogous to life. Otherwise, I wouldn't have written about it. So when you're looking at a career, if you follow that straight line with General Motors, you're going to end up being, the job won't exist, or it'll be miserable, etc. You want to find a career, a path that allows you options, that has open ended. So you've learned something, and now you're working at a startup. And in that startup, you can now learn things where you can maybe start your own business, or maybe you learn new um, computer skills on a higher level. You can learn about marketing. So let's say you're 20 years old. You have a choice of joining some immensely powerful Wall Street firm that's going to pay you 6 figures, or this small startup in Brooklyn or wherever, and it's going to pay you $20,000, but you're going to be among 8 people and you're going to see all of the little branches of that business. Putting yourself there is the equivalent of putting yourself in shit, because you're going to learn all these different things, all these different paths you can take in life depending on what pleases you. That's a potential position of power. So I think it applies to so many things in life. But
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I mentioned earlier I played in my first chess tournament in 24 years last weekend, and there was one skill which I sort of realized I had weakness in, and the weakness doesn't matter so much in like blitz chess, but in very slow chess where the games could last 5 or 6 hours, it was
yeah,
extremely important. Which is that if I only had one plan and I calculated, 20 moves, whatever, how many moves ahead, and I miscalculated, the game was over.
right.
And my weakness was I had to get used to, or get used to again, having multiple plans at the same time, so I could always fall back and not burn the bridges behind me.
Yeah, but
It's important in anything, career, even writing. You have to give yourself outs in some ways. Like if you're writing a story, there has to be many potential ways to have a reader emotionally respond to it.
yeah, and I kind of write my books like that, because if my book was just about one little aspect about power, I would get kind of bored, and I think the reader would get bored. But I take a subject like power and I make it also about seduction. I also make it about the soft forms of power. I also make it about the violent side of power, etc. So every reader can kind of find what they want in it, and it kind of creates this sort of open-endedness where you read into it what you want to read into it. But speaking of chess, for mastery, I kind of read a lot about Bobby Fischer, probably one of the most brilliant chess players ever. And what happened with Bobby Fischer, and maybe it'll happen with you at some point, James, is he'd played so many games of chess since he was like 5 years old, right? Like Mozart or something, that he had internalized all of these different patterns, all of these different ways a game could proceed. So if you were in the middle of a game and it was unlike any board you'd ever see before, a pattern. He had seen it before, and he remembered that in the 5 times he had seen it before, he moved there, he'd move there, he moved there, moved there. This is the one that worked, right? And maybe it won't work because he's playing a different opponent. Because he had internalized so many patterns in that moment, he could be incredibly creative and he could come up with a move that nobody had thought of before. But it was never a rigid thing. He was never approaching it. Even in the moment where somebody made a move, it wasn't like, the next thing I have to do is this because I did it before. He was always like, no, no, this is a different. I'm playing someone different. This is a different game. I'm going to try something completely different here. So that was part of his brilliance, and maybe you'll get there sometime.
Maybe one could hope, but it's interesting because what he's doing is connecting ideas. Like he's taking the current position, connecting it to some other position that he either remembered or intuited, like from something he had once seen, and connected the dots there. I'll tell you an interesting Bobby Fischer story. At some point when he was a kid, I guess he was a little frustrated with his play, so he sort of disappeared for a while. He was known for disappearing throughout his career until his final
Right.
disappearance, but he disappeared for a while. And this was when he was very young, like 14 or 13 years old, something like that. And he studied all of the games of the
That's
1800s. And he
right.
studied them and everybody thought, oh, these are boring games. We're beyond how they played in the 1800s. But he basically improved upon each game. And so he
Right.
came back into play, having improved upon all these games that people had discarded. They didn't even remember anymore. And then he won the U.S. championship like 11-0. He won his first U.S. championship. And it was study and discipline like that really, it's unclear not how talented he was. I mean, I'm sure he had talent, but it was unclear whether he was the greatest talent ever. But he certainly was probably one of the top 3 or 4 hardest working players ever. He was incredibly hardworking. That drove him over the edge a little.
I think there was a high level of creativity there.
Yeah.
The other thing that you'd have to say about the story you just related is that he approached it without an ego. So most people would say, "Oh, the 1800s, they were so inferior to us. We're so much beyond that." He was open to it, and he said, "Other styles, other ways of playing might actually be better than what we're doing now. So I'm not going to be so rigid. I'm not going to be so judgmental about the past. I can learn from people before me, which is another brilliant thing."
Yeah, and then this is related to your story on Xi. He learned Russian as a kid in order to read their chess magazines.
Right, right,
So, because
right,
they were just better players than the Americans. Americans
right.
then were very feeble. Now America is one of the strongest countries, but certainly not then. But so let me ask you this: what's the Law of Sublime going to be about? I love the title, and I'm still having a hard time picturing what you're going to write about.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll try and explain it as well as I can. Basically, the idea is that the essence of being a human being is that we're these social animals and that we have to follow these kind of rules and conventions that society imposes on us. These are ways that you behave in the world, not just ways you behave, but ways you think. This is our reality. You're supposed to think in this way about the world, etc. And this kind of time that we live in always comprises, like, I compare it to a circle. All those rules and conventions about behavior and thinking, they create this kind of limit. This is how you're supposed to think. This is how you're supposed to behave to be an accepted member of our society. That's extremely human. That circle might change. It's not the same as it was thousands of years ago for people in Pacific Islands to now 21st century America, but it's always a circle. And the thing about humans is the moment you create a limit about what we're supposed to do, we're fascinated by what lies beyond that limit, by what is supposedly taboo, by what we're not supposed to think about, what we're not supposed to do, right? We're interested in it because we don't like down deep down inside, we don't like the fact that we're not supposed to explore here or do that. There's a perverse side to human nature. So I say what lies just beyond that circle in any direction is what I call the sublime. You want to explore beyond what is accepted, beyond what people tell you should think, beyond what people tell you should do. And in exploring that realm, you're opening yourself to a new range of emotions, to a new range of ideas. And it's incredibly liberating and it's incredibly exciting. And the ultimate thing at the other side of that circle, the one thing that never changes, is death itself. And so the word sublime from Latin means up to the threshold of a
Hmm.
door. So you're peering inside a door to the other side of that circle. And death is the ultimate door, right? What lies beyond that? And so to have a kind of a brush with death, an encounter with death, is sort of the ultimate form of sublime because you're really going beyond the actual limits of life itself, right? And so in the book, I will describe people with one of the aspects will be near death experiences. But the irony is I had been intending to write this book 17 years ago or so. It's a subject that fascinated me. And then I got distracted by the 50 Cent book, by Mastery, by Human Nature. But my plan had always been that I was going to go jet around the world and I was going to have all of these insane experiences scuba diving in the Caribbean, going to Tierra del Fuego, climbing this mountain, and having all these sublime moments. That had been my plan. And then in 2018, I finished The Laws of Human Nature. The last chapter was about confronting your mortality, confronting your death. And I talk about in there about the sublime itself, just what I've described, right? And then ironically, or I don't know how you want to phrase it, but literally 3 months later, I had a stroke and I came, as you know, because when I last was on your show, I was just had it.
Yeah.
I was like this, I came this close to dying, right? I had that near death experience that I had written about 2 months earlier, but in an intellectual way. So I had had my own like near death experience. It isn't as strong as some people. I wasn't like, having outer body experiences, but I had weird visions and a weird feeling in my body and a sense of death that was kind of welling inside of me. And so now this book that was going to be this thing where I was jetting off here and there and all these abstract ideas became something completely different. First of all, I really literally had experienced what I was going to be writing about. That having that moment changes how you look at the world, changes how you see the sky, changes how you see birds, changes how you see your wife or girlfriend or whomever in the world. Literally happened to me. But the second thing is because I can't jet off and do scuba diving and travel here and there, I have to find the sublime as I'm writing the book in my office here in this room that you're seeing behind me. I'm in my chair. I can't even take a hike right now because still can't walk very well. And so I have to find it in my mind. I have to experience it just by seeing things around me and thinking about them. And so now when I write the book, I think the reader won't have this impression, wow, I have to jet off to Kathmandu to have this book to do what he's doing here. No, you can have it wherever you are because that's how I had to write the book itself. So it sort of changed from my initial conception of it. And so I describe different forms of this experience. I describe the cosmic sublime, which has to do with the origin of our universe. And then I go into the biological sublime about life itself on our planet. I go into ancient religions and the kind of sublime experiences that we can still have. I go into childhood. I go into the brain itself, et cetera, different angles from exploring outside that circle. That's sort of the idea.
And how can this sounds really beautiful, this book. Like how can someone wake up tomorrow and practice experiencing the sublime in their life?
Well, you know what? I don't like writing intellectual academic books. And every book, so that's always been the story of my life. So people write books about seduction. They write it as if there's no juice or sexiness to it because it's written from this academic point of view, right?
Mm.
It's so boring, or power or whatever. So I'm not going to write a book on the sublime like other people have written this very abstract thing. I'm going to hit you in the reader with ideas about how you can go out and experience it. So in the second part of each chapter, I describe how you can have the experience, and I try and make it as practical as possible. So obviously, the cosmic sublime has to do with the Big Bang and the origin of our universe. Well, you can kind of experience it that just by walking outside your house and kind of seeing things about gravity, seeing things about mountains, etc., knowing that the planet you walk on, all of the material and everything inside of your own body originated from the Big Bang. And I go into depth about that. And I go into depth about how you can think about your own body and think about the landscapes around you in terms of something rather cosmic. And I also describe how on the internet, you have now the ability to look at things in the plant and the universe and the cosmos that are unbelievable. Like they have actually filmed a black hole. They took a photograph of a black hole.
Mm.
And I describe what a black hole is in that chapter. And it's such a thing that you can't even conceive of it. They actually took a photograph of it. But these pictures that they have taken with the Hubble telescope, etc., of our universe, of galaxies far, far away, just looking at those photographs is going to blow your mind. They've also recorded sounds from outer space. So you can kind of hear, they even have somebody record what they think the Big Bang sounded like, you know? So you can in your armchair, you can have these experiences. So every chapter I go into depth about how you can have this kind of awareness and practice it. So I just wrote a chapter about what I call the pagan sublime, where I talk about how people looked at the world 4,000 years ago, in a much different context and their religion, etc., and how interesting it was. And I describe in the last part how you can go around and walk around your city, your town, your neighborhood, wherever it is, and you can see the world momentarily through their eyes and how different that was and how exciting it is to try these experiments.
And let me ask this, although I think the answer is almost obvious, but what is the benefit of it? What is the benefit of having sublime experiences?
Well, on one level, it frees up the mind. So I have this feeling that when you go into your smartphone and you spend so much time, you're literally shrinking down to the size of a bit inside your phone, like the incredible shrinking, whatever that movie was,
Mm.
You're just getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Your thoughts are being programmed by Instagram, by Facebook. They're not your own thoughts. Your thoughts are shrinking. You're shrinking until you become this little dot, right? And it's happening to a lot of people. So when you go out and you do the opposite, which is opening your mind up to all these things that I'm describing, you're expanding yourself. You're expanding your mind. You're expanding your
Mm.
consciousness.
Mm.
Number one, that will make you a more creative person in life because you're not going to be having this narrow little vision of the world. You're going to be thinking, wow, this world could have been so much different. There's so many possibilities out there. Since this world might not have existed the way it is, since there might not be sunlight or color, maybe I should think differently about my plans here. Maybe there are other possibilities I never thought of. It's also going to open you up to this reality. It's going to make you appreciate things. So I describe in the second chapter how the world came about, the earth that we sit on here right now, and I create a picture of the insane odds, the astronomical odds against you and me, James, sitting here talking on Squadcast or whatever it's called, is unbelievable that it ever happened. And I go through the list of how life almost never started on this planet 3 billion years ago. How complex life was a complete accident. I mean, multicellular life was a complete accident, almost never happened. How through evolution there were all these bottlenecks where how we evolved might never have happened. The dinosaurs might not have gone extinct 60 million years ago. If an asteroid, which had just barely hit the planet, if it had missed, there'd still be dinosaurs walking around.
Mm.
How humans nearly went extinct 80,000 years ago. There was only like 10,000 humans on the planet left, and one virus could have wiped all of us out. And then what would have happened? Then there would be Neanderthals would be ruling the world. On and on and on. And then goes to this. Think of your parents when they met, how unlikely it was that they met and then produced you, right? Now multiply that by 70,000 generations, which is how many there are going back to maybe the origin of Homo sapiens. So 70,000 times people connected, had sex, had children, and they might very easily not have. And if they hadn't, you wouldn't be here who you are right now. So these kinds of thoughts kind of alter how you look at the moment right now.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I think you're right. There is a lot of pleasure, and it's an interesting analogy of looking at it as the opposite of looking at the cell phone or the smartphone. I mean, it's used to be called a cell phone, now it's a smartphone, and how it shrinks you literally. And I think that's really true. We get absorbed into these worlds without realizing it, and not realizing that they're just screens and that they're not real. And so I'm looking forward to that book. When's it going to be? When are you going to publish it? Do you take 6 years to write a book? You take like a year or two.
It's good. Oh, it's going to take more than that. Mostly because I'm not complaining, but I can't type. Still can't type because of my left hand. So I have to go through this weird Byzantine process of handwriting things out, of correcting it through handwriting in 4 different notebooks, and then dictating it through a dictation software, then trying to. So it's taking me longer than usual. So long story short, it's going to be another couple of years, I'm afraid.
Do you think, like obviously you're doing physical therapy? How well do you see yourself recovering over time?
It's been up in a roller coaster because sometimes I think I'm on the way there. It's been 3 years now, making progress. Then some days I feel like I've not progressed at all. And so it's very emotionally trying. Somebody will come up to me with some new therapy. I'll get all excited about it. Okay, I'll do it. I'll spend thousands of dollars on this. And then it doesn't really change anything. And then I begin to wonder, well, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the problem. These are all common things that people have when they're a stroke. So I originally thought by now, I would be back to typing, swimming, hiking, none of which has happened. I still think I will get there, but it's going to take. I know the actress Sharon Stone had a stroke very similar to mine at a similar age, and she's written about it in interviews, and it took her 7 years to get back.
Wow.
So I might have 4 more years of this.
I didn't know that about her. So she must have, and then she had active physical therapy. Like it probably takes a lot of. Is it work each day?
I do like at least an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours every day. I have a special bicycle. It's called a recumbent bike. It's like a fancy tricycle that allows me to go up in the hills and get all the exercise I used to get, which is my only form of therapy, but it's really been life-saving. And then, so I do that, and then I do physical therapy every night. I have new therapists who I think are really, really good, and I'm hopeful about that. And I'm following their exercises. I'm just, I can't help it. I'm almost getting a little bit emotional. I can't help but feeling kind of disappointed in how slowly my progress is coming. So,
But at the same time, though, Robert, these books, you're like the Daily Laws, I found to be so wonderful and so beautiful. It's definitely something that I as I was reading it, I was thinking, I'm reading it right now to prepare for this podcast. I need to read it also when I'm not, and I rarely say this, I need to read it now just for me. I have to do a second reading so that I could just enjoy it instead of be overthinking like which passage is going to lead to questions and so on. Like it's a different style of reading. But I enjoyed it so much, and I thought this is going to be so useful to me in my life. I need to read this, and I was thinking specifically of my daughters and one son. I need them to read it, and I hope they do. So it's such a valuable book. I mean, that's why also, when I saw you writing this book, The Laws of the Sublime, I was really curious, like what it's going to be about, and these are real masterpieces that you bring into the world. So, and I'm always so grateful to have you on the podcast and talk to you about these things. You basically, it's like I'm getting you're Robert Greene consulting for free. So it's always an amazing thing because it changes my life. So, but
Well,
thank you for coming on.
well, I want to see your next comedy routine about chess. I'm looking forward to
Yeah, I hope it's a comedy and not a tragedy.
that.
So, well, time will tell. So,
Yeah,
failures first, apparently.
yeah.
Thank you so much, Robert. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate the books as well.
Thank you, James. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm really good fun. By the way, I really loved your book as well.
Entresto, sacubitril valsartan tablets, is the #1 heart failure brand prescribed by cardiologists and has helped over 1 million people with heart failure. It's a prescription medicine that treats adults with long-lasting chronic heart failure and works better when the heart cannot pump a normal amount of blood to the body.
Don't take Entresto if pregnant. It can cause harm or death to an unborn baby. Don't take Entresto with an ACE inhibitor or aliskiren, or if you've had angioedema with an ACE or ARB. Don't take with aliskiren or within 36 hours of taking an ACE inhibitor. The most serious side effects are angioedema, low blood pressure, kidney problems, or high blood potassium. Angioedema is swelling of your face, lips, tongue, and throat that may cause death. If it causes difficulty breathing, get emergency help.
Ask your doctor about Entresto. To learn more, visit support.entresto.com or call 833-446-6699. For pricing, visit Entresto.com/cost. If you can't afford your medication, Novartis may be able to help.